I was telling you about the Satanic Temple and how they're very much, they're all across the country, they're doing this good stuff, frankly, in my opinion. And I'm no fan of Satan either, but, they aren't either. They just kind of use they're exploiting Satan, shall we say. In fact, the Bender Bones, the fellow who's going to speak, who's going to do the invocation for the county, unless these right-wingers prevent him. He says, his speech was, he said, "I want to thank the county board and the Ottawa Impact Organization for their declaration of intent to uphold the values enshrined in our Constitution." He is an ordained minister of the Satanic Temple in West Michigan. He told the board in May, quote, "Our constitutional rights are our most cherished assets as United States citizens, and even more so as Satanists. The First Amendment states that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion nor restricting the free exercise thereof." And of course, restricting the free exercise thereof is exactly what this county commission is trying to do. As I said, the simple solution, if he doesn't, the number one, if you think that your number one commitment in life is to Christ rather than to the county, then go to work for the church instead of the county. And number two, if you don't want Satanists to speak, if you don't want to have a satanic minister giving the invocation at your event, then don't have anybody give one. Which brings us to the father of the Constitution, James Madison, the guy who sat in the room and helped write the Constitution, spent 5 years studying constitutions all over the world. He was only in his mid-30s when this happened, a young man, very, very bright young man. And this is what he had to say. This is from an 1822 letter to Edward Livingston. He said, "We are teaching the world the great truth, that governments do better without kings and nobles than with them. The merit will be doubled by the other lesson we are teaching the world, that religion flourishes in greater purity without than with the aid of government." Now, let me just put this in context. While Thomas Paine was an atheist, as I told you, and Thomas Jefferson was close to being an atheist, he was a deist, as was Ben Franklin, many of the other founders, Benjamin Rush, George Mason. I mean, a bunch of them were deists. And the deists believed that there was some original thing that started the universe, some original consciousness or being or whatever. Something started it all. But it started the universe with a particular set of laws and rules, and that the universe has just been rolling along on those laws and rules, which would include evolution, ever since. And that there is no conscious divinity that is intervening in the affairs of human beings. That, you can honor that divinity, you can connect to that divinity, and Jefferson talked about this. In fact, Franklin he called it the mystery, and talked about the feeling that he would get, like looking at the sky at night as a child. The mystery is the religious experience. But by and large, the deists were not, they did not believe in an active God. And but James Madison did. James Madison was, I believe he was a Presbyterian. I'd have to go back and look. He might have been a Congregationalist, but it was one or the other. And he was very into his church. He went every Sunday. Sometimes he would go twice to two. There were two services at this church. Sometimes he would go to both services. He taught Sunday school. He was very involved in his church throughout his life, James Madison. So this is not a guy who, like Thomas Paine or like Thomas Jefferson or like Ben Franklin, didn't believe in religion, didn't believe in Jesus. This was a guy who did. And so to listen to what he had to say. In that same letter to Edward Livingston, he said, "I have no doubt that every new example will succeed, as every past one has done, in showing that religion and government will both exist in greater purity the less they are mixed together." James Madison was interested in protecting the government that he helped create, the Constitution that he was the major force in writing. But he was also very interested in protecting his church from the government. And I think that's kind of the great lesson here, where the Satanic Temple comes in and says, hey, what about us? We're a religion too. And then the government says, oh, no, you can't do that. So Madison also, I mean, this is how strongly Madison felt about this. This was also from the same letter. He said, "Is the appointment of chaplains to the two houses of Congress consistent with the Constitution and with the pure principle of religious freedom?" He asks in this letter to Edward Livingston. And then he answers himself. He said, in the strictness, the answer on both points must be in the negative. The establishment to the chaplainship to Congress is a palpable violation of equal rights as well as of constitutional principles. Now, Congress has had a chaplain since its beginning, and it continues to. Right? There's still an official chaplain to Congress. And Madison didn't stop that, but he wanted to. He goes on. He continues in this letter. He says, if religion consists in voluntary acts of individuals, singly or voluntarily associated, and it be proper that public functionaries, as well as their constituents, should discharge their religious duties, let them, like their constituents, do so at their own expense. Right? In other words, why is Congress paying a salary to a chaplain when we're not supposed to support religion? We're not supposed to stop it either. We're supposed to be neutral. He goes on. How small a contribution from each member of Congress would suffice for that purpose? Exclamation mark. He said, how would it be in its principle? How just would it be in its principle? Exclamation mark. How noble in its exemplary sacrifice to the genius of the Constitution and the divine right of conscience. Exclamation mark. He's talking about, okay, members of Congress, if you want to have a chaplain, pay for him yourself. Pass the collection plate. He goes on to say, why should the expense of a religious worship be allowed for the legislature be paid by the public more than that for the executive or judiciary branch of the government? In a separate letter that he wrote to Edward Everett on March 18th, 1823, James Madison said, the settled opinion here, and by the way, there was a major religious revival in the 1810s and the early 1820s, and this was 1823. This was kind of on the back end of that. That's why nobody showed up for Thomas Paine's funeral. So anyhow, he writes to Edward Everett. He said, the settled opinion here is that religion is essentially distinct from civil government and exempt from its cognizance, and that a connection between them is injurious to both. So, in my mind, good on the Satanic Temple for what they're doing, for bringing this, highlighting this,